Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Stuart Fischman. This is the Web Yeshiva. We're going to talk about the stage of the Seder called Rachtzah, which is the Netilat Yadayim before we eat the matzah. First, I'd like to apologize for not being with you yesterday. There was a misunderstanding on my part, and I'm very appreciative that for anyone who comes to this evening's class, as well as to the Ezra and everybody at the Web Yeshiva for rescheduling. So Rachtzah, as opposed to in the Seder, we wash our hands twice. The first hand washing is called orchatz, before we eat the vegetable. It's dipped in salt water, and that's been discussed by another member of the Web Yeshiva. Rachtzah is the conventional netilat yadayim, which we do before we eat bread. And the reason that we do netilat yadayim before we eat bread is it's a Gemara in Chulin, which is the basic Gemara about netilat yadayim. And let me just get the pointer. Okay. And we'll get more into this. There's netilat yadayim because Chazal, and we'll discuss more of this later again, made a certain decree for everyone to wash their hands before they eat bread, because everyone needed to wash their hands even if they were tahor before they handled truma or kochim in general. So, for example, we're mafresh challah these days, right? You bake. I imagine everyone, especially women who bake their own challah, they know they're mafresh challah if they bake a certain quantity, they can prepare a certain quantity of dough. When there was Tumah Tara, and during the times of Beit HaMikdash, and even afterwards, as long as there were ashes from the Parah Adumah, a woman would give this dough to a Kohen, and the Kohen would bake it, and they would treat it like truma, which is kodesh, and the woman who's mafresh challah herself has to be tahor. And there are many rules of Tumah Tara, which we'll talk about later today. But that's why we're washing our hands in the Seder. The first washing of hands is really unique. It's a good, and I'm sure we discussed this and gave the class on it, gave the various reasons why we do this at the Seder for vegetables. But for matzah, it's like any other netilat yadayim. So, I'd like to really discuss first is an interesting halacha. Is matzah bread? Is matzah bread? We know what bread is. Matzah doesn't look like bread. It's crunchy. It's more like a cracker. And there's an halacha in Shulchan Aruch in the context of Netilat Yadayim for pot, which is bread. There is Netilat Yadayim. There are several chapters in Shulchan Aruch which have the rules of Netilat Yadayim. But there's another category of baked goods, which is called pata ba'abekisnin. This is a Gemara in Masechet Brachot. Pata ba'abekisnin, it's not clear exactly what it was or is, but it's a sort of intermediate between cake and bread. Bread requires netilat yadayim and birkat hamazon. Cake, let's say it's an apple strudel, okay, or a custard pie. Its baremi name is anot and al michya, and significantly, bread requires netilat yadayim. Cakes, let's call them custard pies, don't require netilat yadayim. And the Gemara says that there's something called pata ba'abekisnin. Now, what is pata ba'abekisnin? Okay, the Gemara doesn't really elaborate on what it is. And the Shulchan Aruch has three interpretations of pata ba'abekisnin. The first interpretation As pata ba esomid kisim shmonotam dvasho sukar vegozim shkedim betavlin, and which were called rishkulish rushkulish. Okay, it's some kind of pastry, a dough which is mixed with nuts and honey and sugar and almonds and spices, and it's a stuffed pastry. Kisnin means kisim, and kisim, as we all know in Hebrew, means a pocket. It's a pocket of pastry. Okay? And perhaps that's pata babakisnin. And then there's another interpretation to be found for pata babakisnin. Isa shevot vashu shemen o chalvanet tavon va'af'ah. Okay, it's not so much that the pastry is stuffed, it's that the dough of the pastry, it's not just flour and water. There's honey, oil, milk, other spices, and the other ingredients, you really taste them in the dough. That's a famous thing. It's for another discussion for another day, what we call sweet chalot. You can buy, at least here in Israel, plain what's called water challah, and it's just flour and dough. It's not sweet at all. Or most bakeries, at least where I live here in Efrat, they make a sweeter challah. And then you have a thing between Eidot Mizrach and Ashkenazim. Eidot Mizrach say that sweet challah is mezonot. It's pata babakisnin. As opposed to Ashkenazim who say sweet challah is still hamotzi. And that's why the Mechaber says, if you can taste the sweetness in the dough, it's not hamotzi anymore. It's pata babakisnin. The Ramah says, and we'll just highlight what he says. No, if all you did was make a sweet dough, that's bread. That's Yiddish. Unless it's so sweet that really the honey and the other spices are the most significant ingredient. All right. So pata babakisnin is either stuffed dough, what I think here is what are they called? And they're called in Spanish names are called empanadas, sapukis. Okay, they're stuffed pastries, or they're very sweet pastry, or I put this in red. That's important for our purposes today. Yesh b'farshim pot. It's bread. In other words, it's flour and water. Whether it's been there are spices and sweets in it or not. They're very, very dry and they crunch. They crunch. And the halacha, we say all three are considered pata babakisnin, and they have the status of pata babakisnin. Now, what is the status of pata babakisnin? We go back. Pata babakisnin, any baked good which has one of the three parameters of pata babakisnin, we say berei minei mezonot on it, and afterwards alamichya. Okay? Now, if you can make a meal out of it, and if you make a meal out of it, then it's birkat hamazon. So where does this leave matzah? Matzah is certainly dry. Matzah is certainly crunchy. Do I really need to do netilat yadayim on matzah? Do I? And actually, as surprising it may be, it's a serious discussion, particularly among the Sephardi poskim. And we'll see Rav Ovadia Yosef, what he says about matzah. Hasfardim of Bnei Dot Mizrach nogim lovech al matzah la'achar Pesach b'rei minei mezonot. So after Pesach, matzah is mezonot. It's a very unusual halacha that the bracha on the food changes. During Pesach, the consensus is that matzah is hamotzi, because that's the only bread that we have. We're not eating regular bread. So matzah, so to speak, moves up a league, goes from mizonot to hamotzi. But after Pesach is over, Eidot HaMizrach say in burying the mizonot on their matzah. And really, there's what to rely upon for this custom. But people who are more careful will only eat matzah after they say hamotzi on regular bread. Or they're making a meal out of the matzah, which is what we do on Pesach. We have no other bread, and if you're going to have a meal with bread, you're going to, instead of bread, you're going to eat matzah. And how much? And you have to have what's called kovei seudah. You have to make a meal out of the matzah. Gram. It's 230 grams, which is a quarter of a kilo. It's a considerable. It's like 2 matzahs. A kilo box of matzah. It's like 8 or 10 shmur matzahs. That's a lot of matzah. Okay, 230 grams is a lot of matzah. And then Rabbi Yosef says you say netilat yadayim on your matzah, but without a bracha. Okay, and if you're going to bring netilat yadayim on your matzah after Pesach, okay, he says you have what to rely upon. And this is all after Pesach. And some people say, if all you can have is a little taste of bread, and you're not going to love matzah, then really you don't see Birkat HaMazon. A person who does not eat bread at all. If for some reason you don't eat bread and you only eat as matzah, and this is a big issue for people of celiac. They cannot eat what we call regular matzah, because it's made from wheat and they're gluten intolerant. So all they ever eat is basically oat matzah. I have relatives who do this. They eat oat or spelt, and they won't eat bread either. It's like they bake it. It doesn't really rise. It's flat. Basically, matzah is a dough that doesn't rise, and for various reasons, more involved with the chemistry of the food, oat and spelt don't. If they're pure oat and pure spelt, they don't really rise. They could say, and they bake it like matzah. Then you say motzi Birkat HaMazon. Ashkenazim make hamotzi on matzah all year long. That's an interesting halacha. So we're doing Rachtzah. Ashkenazim, well, of course you can do netilat yadayim because we hold that matzah is not pata b'kisnin, but Eidot HaMizrach say that it is, and the bracha changes during the year. And so you can look into details. I think it's an interesting halacha. So he has footnotes. Matzah is hard and it crunches. It's pata b'kisnin, and it's mezonot and alamichya. These all, Bakinova was a rav in Egypt. Shulchanin Dechai, Kentavar Yisrael Sasa, Sefer Korban Isha, Minchat Shmuel, Ranachida. One of the great Sephardi poskim says, he says, people say mezonot on matzah. After Pesach, to avoid this doubt of what bracha I should make, the Marani Chida said, don't eat matzah after Pesach unless you're making a meal out of it. Sefer Berach Hasavam Prisako, Sefer Beis Menucha, Bosif Linear Rashvil Yeresh Shemaim Mishal Chil Vechal Matzah B'Reim Nizonos. But Marani Chida says, in his opinion, yes, you can just say B'Reim Nizonos on matzah. And there's no need to be worried and have a suffix. There's no need to make a meal out of it. Because of the Lazar, Shringavecha Matzot Mezonot. In Kartav, Rav Gan Mechina Megaviel, Sefro, Makot Halacha, Shekina Minhag. He said it's the minhag among the Sephardim. After Pesach, again, the matzah that you were saying Hamotzi on during Pesach now becomes Mezonos. Amna Misheri Knesset Zakadola, Kashal Matzah Shvech Hamotzi because Hamazon. Fish in a kasha kol kach. This is interesting. Matzah has evolved. In America, I never saw this. But here in Israel, there's something called lafa, which is a flat pita, no pocket, and it's dough. It's not baked until it burns. Basically, matzah is baked until all the moisture is gone. That's Ashkenazi matzah. It's crunchy. Many Sephardim have lafa on Pesach. They call it matzot rakot. Because lafa might be chametz, but they're called matzot rakot, and you can buy them in Israeli supermarkets with fine mahadran hashkachot on it. And most people would rather eat a lafa than matzah, especially because a true Israeli delicacy is they grill turkey and you stuff your lafa with it. It's called shawarma, and this is really delicious. If you don't live in Israel and you've never tasted the lafa with a shawarma, really, it's worth making the trip here just to get a lafa with a shawarma. And that's matzah in the sense, again, we think that this is matzah, but that's not the only way to make matzah. Matzah means you bake the dough from start to finish, from kneading to the end, you'll never leave it alone for 18 minutes, and it's baked enough that you can pull it apart, and there are no threads of unbaked dough inside this, let's call it, baked good. That's a lafa. And it's like for Ashkenazim, you never think that this would be matzah. But really, it could be matzah. And like Rabbi Yosef said, quoting the Marana Chida, he says, you know what? I think you can make hamotzi on matzah, she'ena kashel kokach. The matzot that the Sherei Knesset Gdolah saw weren't hard. It was lafa. And it's fine, and it's kosher, and it's wonderful. But Rabbi Yosef says, you know what? These days, we're making matzahs that are very, very dry. Okay, so even the Sherei Knesset Gdolah who said that matzah is a motzi because it's not so hard. Well, these days we're making dry, brittle matzahs. That's the discussion about matzah. What bracha to make on it. It's an interesting thing, but we are all doing Rachtzah with a bracha on yedayim, because on Pesach, these dry, brittle things that we call matzah, that's our only bread. As an aside, just to say, well, maybe if I'm an Ashkenazi and I think lafa is certainly more appetizing than matzah, can I eat lafa on Pesach? So Rav Asher Weiss has a tshuva on this. Rav Asher Weiss is a great gadol. He lives in Yerushalayim. Ched matzah drakot b'Pesach Ashkenazim. And Ashkenazim eat lafa on Pesach. Okay, but now he will see the evolution of matzah baking. Now, before betur, shagam Ashkenaz matzah so shlosha matzot shel seder mi'isaron. Isaron is the shear for being mafresh challah. It's about 1,300 grams of flour, 2 pounds, and from my wife, when she bakes enough, when she uses enough dough, the mafresh challah with a bracha, she gets of it like 4 big chalot and a few rolls. The Torah says from that quantity of dough, you can get 3 matzahs. So their matzah in those days was very, very thick. Okay? Think about that. From 2 pounds of dough, a kilo 300, you can get 3 matzahs. I mean, these days, a kilo of dough, a kilo of matzah, you get 10 matzahs. And the Torah was getting 3. They were thicker. Okay? It evolved. That's it. Their 3 matzot was like 30 of our matzot. Their 3 matzot were thick as 30 of our matzot. Now you can say, well, maybe they were huge matzot. Maybe they weren't thicker. They were the size of my kitchen table. No, he says that makes no sense. Okay, that's impossible. Their matzahs were very, very thick. Okay, it's just a fact. Now, that minhag changed. Now we go for thin matzah because again, chametz is dough that rises, and dough rises when it's not completely heated to the extent that all the yeast die. If you're making something that's this thick, and really they're talking about matzahs that are like this thick, there's a real chance that in the center of the dough didn't really bake through, and then you're eating chametz. It's safer, and I mean, yes, it's nice to have matzah, but more important, not to eat chametz. So make sure it's baked through. We make thin matzahs. That's why our matzot are so thin. Okay? In the old days, they weren't making such thin matzahs. Where'd my page go? Excuse me. There we are. Their matzahs were bigger and much thicker. But they had to be soft. If their matzah, which is like 4 inches thick, was as hard as our matzah, it'd be impossible to eat. Right? It'd be impossible to eat. And they bake their matzahs that the middle matzah, you have people to Seder. These days, our matzot are small, so we hand out a lot of matzahs. But in the 14th century, they would have one very large matzah, which it was broke up into pieces, and they got their kazayim. So their matzah was like humongous, right? Not like our matzahs at all. Not like our matzahs at all. Not like our matzahs at all. Okay? So the matzah had to be thick and soft. Even the Chatam Sofer, who lived in the middle of the 19th century, he also made large, thick matzot. And if our matzahs are thin, obviously we can't hand out a kazayit to everyone at the table from a single matzah. Okay, but that was their minhag. Okay. And that's that. He quotes Tosfot that you should break up the matzot. You should be able to separate them like a challah without breaking it in half. Again, our matzot are brittle. Our matzot are brittle, not like the matzot that were baked even 150 years ago. why are we making our matzahs thin, crunchy wafers? So it shouldn't be as thick as bread. Okay, and why don't you want it to be as thick as bread? You want to make sure that it's baked through. Okay, because if it's thick dough, it might become chametz. And so the Rabbah, they still say their matzah was as thick as a finger. And that's still thicker than our matzahs. Our matzahs are like 2 pieces of paper. And their matzahs also had to be soft. Because matzah that's as thick as your finger, if it was hard as our matzah, you couldn't eat it. So Rav Asher Weiss is puzzled, like, why are we making matzahs so thin? He says, you know what? Maybe it's not really because of the problem of chametz, but because we mass produce our matzahs and we make them a lot in advance. Yeah, I mean, I bought my matzahs last week. I mean, we have to make a lot of them. In the old days, every town had a few Jews. They baked matzahs on a small scale. Now matzah is mass produced. If you would mass produce soft matzah, in other words, lafot, they mold. I mean, unless you keep them in the freezer, they go bad in a day or two. The matzahs that we're using these days, they wrap them in cellophane. They're good. I mean, I know people of matzahs from last year, and they're just going to take them out of the cellophane and use them. I mean, they're so dry, nothing really goes wrong with them. That's what Rav Asher Weiss thinks what drove the transition to thin matzahs. Okay, so but the lafot will either mold or get stale. So can I eat lafa? And I would love to have lafa on Pesach. It's better than matzah. Why not? What does Rav Asher Weiss say? You need a method. How do I know what's chametz? And I know that when I bake a matzah that's as thin as a wafer, and it's so baked that there are burnt spots in there, all these little brown bubbles, there's no chametz in there. This thing is baked. Comes to the lafa, well, do I really know what's going on in the middle of the lafa? Was I there? Okay, I don't know. He says it is an issue. So you should not eat lafa on Pesach if you're an Ashkenazi. I mean, for years, I mean, it's been a very long time since any Ashkenazi has seen a soft, chewy matzah. We have minhagim. That's our custom. We don't have soft, chewy matzah. Well, Pesach, Pesach, and it's Isser Chametz, which is Kares Chalila. We should avoid change. Err on the side of caution. Sofer says a lot can go wrong if you're baking thick, soft matzah. That's what he says in Germany, they put an end to it. So if you're a Sephardi, enjoy your lafa. And if that's what you're eating at the Seder, it's certainly hamotzi, without any doubt. If you're an Ashkenazi, well, that's what you're going to eat during Pesach. You're always going to make hamotzi. You're always doing the netilat yadayim. If for Idot HaMizrach, you'll do netilat yadayim and such as Rachtzah for your matzah, if that's the matzah that you're eating during Pesach. And after Pesach, you can say mezonot and al michya. But Rav Yosef would suggest that you should say al netilat yadayim on the shear of bread, which is a kabetza, so you can say al netilat yadayim with a bracha and birkas hamazon. So that's bread and Rachtzah. Okay. Any questions? Pipe. Mute. Unmute all. Any questions?
No.
Okay, if no questions, then we'll just go on to the next subject, which is Natilat Yadayim itself. Most of us know Natilat Yadayim, but it's nice to review. I just have to open up the files. Excuse me. Okay. So, what are we doing with Natilat Yadayim? And why are we doing Natilat Yadayim? We got the Rambam. Where's my Rambam? Okay. In Seder Tarot, there's a Masechet called Yadayim, hands. And what's it all about? Not the Masechet Zuot Dama. This is the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah. Here's an introduction to this Masechet called Yadayim. This is what we do, Natilat Yadayim, which is not Tevilat Yadayim. Sometimes they'd actually, for Kodshim, immerse their hands in a mikvah. But for bread and Truma, it was enough to wash their hands, as we do. And there's a din d'Rabbanan that everyone who's eating bread must do Natilat Yadayim, even if the bread is chulin. Which is explained in Masechet Chagiga, which has all the decrees that were made to protect Kodshim from impurity. Whenever you dip any food into a liquid, you do Natilat Yadayim, which is what we're doing at Urchatz, at the beginning of the Seder. But regular fruit, which isn't Truma, and they're dry, it's not Natilat Yadayim. And actually, the Gemara says, whoever does Natilat Yadayim for fruit is just arrogant. Okay. And we do Natilat, there are rules for this. This is not washing our hands to keep them clean. That's why there's a verb, Natilat Yadayim, which makes, in literal Hebrew, doesn't really mean very much, to take the hands. Washing in Hebrew is Rachtzah. When you wash your hands when they're dirty, in Hebrew say Shotfimat hayadayim. We're rinsing them off. Natilat Yadayim is what we do because of Truma. Because people are eating Truma, and Bezrat Hashem Mashiach will come today even. We'll go back to eating Truma, we'll know all these halachot, the whys and wherefore. So that's Natilat Yadayim. It's based on Truma. There are a lot of halachot about Natilat Yadayim, a lot of technicalities, and they come from the laws of Tuma and Tara. The Magen Avram is one of certainly the great commentators to Shulchan Aruch, and this is his introduction to Natilat Yadayim. Magen Avram wrote his commentary in the late 17th century, if I'm not mistaken, and the laws of Natilat Yadayim, he said, are really perplexing. And normally his commentary is like 4 or 5 words, but he wrote an introduction. Harosh v'siyato sovrim, the Yadayim ein etamrakad perek. As the Rambam says, there's a din d'Rabbanan of Tumah. Normally, if a person is Tameh, you can't say the right from Minatorah, my nose is Tameh, or my hands are Tameh. The person is Tameh, but a person isn't Tameh, and if the person is Tameh, they need to go into a mikvah. Hands. There's a special decree regarding the hands. They're Tameh. What part of my hand is Tameh? According to the Rosh, the tumah of the hands is only up to the wrist. Now we wash our hands twice, and I think we once had a series of classes on Natilat Yadayim. Why do we wash each hand twice? The first water makes the hand pure. Now that water is impure, and if my impure water on my right hand would touch my other hand, which was already washed twice, now that hand is tamei again because of the contact with the water on the first hand. Okay, I'm the other way around. I wash my first hand once, and then I wash it again twice. If another hand would touch this water, maybe my hand is tamei again. So you have to be very careful what you're doing with your hands and all these other things. The big rule is that a revi'at of water on your hand is not tamei. And the other Rishonim say, no, your hand is only tamei up to your fingers join your hand itself. That's where the tamei is. And the Aruch says, no, even your forearm can be tamei. And Magen Avraham has to sort all of this out. I'm just showing this to you because it's a complicated subject, and they wanted to make the process foolproof. And the summary is in the Chai Adam. The Chai Adam wrote the great summary of halacha. Shir mayim l'netilas yadayim l'pachas mervias l'kol yad. Use a revius for each hand. A revius, let's just say, is a cup of water. If you wash each hand with a revius, you're really avoiding a lot of complexity, which is what the Magen Avraham writes in his introduction. And everybody knows all the technicalities of Natilat Yadayim, in the sense what's tamei and what's tahor. Let's say Yotzei Kol Sfeikos. Use a whole cup of water, you're free, you're good. And if you use more water, even better. So even if you do use 1 cup of water for the initial rinse, take another cup of water for the second rinse, just to clear off the first water. Okay. And he says, take the revius of water, wash your hand up to your wrist, at least up to the ends of your fingers. Okay. Okay, so you wash a revius of water on your first hand, and then you touched your other hand before you washed it, or someone else touched your hand. Then if your hands are wet and it was touched by a hand that isn't washed, now it's tamei again because of the water's tamei the hand. But he says without a bracha. After you wash each hand, both of them, and they're twice with water, rub them together and raise them up. So you raise your hands before you say the bracha. And then before you wipe them on the towel, dry them on the towel, say the bracha. Okay. Chatzitza, just like mikvah, the entire hand has to get wet. Just like if I go to mikvah, if I'm tamei, my entire body has to get wet. Chatzitza can be, okay, your hands should be clean. A common issue is Band-Aids. You have a cut on your hand, you have a Band-Aid on your hand. What do you do about chatzitza of a bandage? So just look at these halachot. This is from the Piskei Teshuvot. It's an anthology. Band-Aids, Hebrew it's called a plaster. A gauze pad, a bandage of other kinds. Shulchan Aruch says, a person has a wound on his hand or a bandage. You can wash your hand, and with the skin under the bandage is okay. It can stay dry. And he breaks it down. If you have a wound on your hand, and removing the bandage will hurt, or you can't remove it because it's like a cast, or the doctor says not to remove it, you might get infected, and you don't take this off as a rule, okay? then it's not a barrier. It's part of your hand now. It's not a barrier to the water. Okay, and then just be careful. And if the doctor says keep it dry, you use your revius of water, and don't pour any water on the bandage. That's good. Okay, and if now, if it's a bandage and you want to keep it dry and it got wet, then okay, and you don't want it to get wet, then wrap it up in something that's clean and then you can eat. Okay. If you have two bandages on it, it's a double bandage. You have the bandage with the ointment, and then you have another bandage on top of that bandage just to keep it in place. Then, if you can remove it without any pain, you should remove it. Okay, and just leave the more medicinal bandage in its place, and just keep it dry. You don't have to worry about it. It's not a chatzitza. Okay. If the doctor's saying no, your hand has to stay dry. Don't wash this hand. We don't want any water possibly leaking under the bandage. Okay? Then put some wrapped plastic around the hand that has to stay dry. This way, and you use that hand to wash your other hand. Okay? And if both hands have to stay dry, you have chalila bandages on both hands, then don't say netilat yadayim. Let's say you just had a little cut, you have a band-aid on it, it's not a big deal, you can take the band-aid off, it doesn't bother you, it doesn't hurt to remove it, then you have to take it off before netilat yadayim. Okay? Now, if your bandage is there, it's stuck on, it's going to stay there for a while, and you don't plan on changing the bandage, and it doesn't, you have to have the bandage, it doesn't annoy you, it doesn't bother you, and then even if there's it won't be painful to remove it, but you're not planning on removing it, it's not a chatzitza. Wash your hands with a revius and just leave it there. And that's chatzitza, just to review because it's a common question. Just to finish, I want to finish with a Rambam. He talks about Tumah and Tara. Because again, the Netilat Yadayim that we're doing at Orchatz is all part of an original decree to preserve and protect Truma and other Kachim. And this is at the end of Tumas Ochlin, which is really what we're talking about. The idea of Netilat Yadayim was to prevent the food that's Kodesh, the Truma and the Challah, becoming Tameh. Whatever we learn in the Torah and in the Halach about Tum and Tara, really, the only things that we worry about Tumah was for food in Beis HaMikdash, Korbanos, Chumas, and Meiser Sheni. Because people are Tameh, may not enter Beis HaMikdash, they may not eat Kodshim, they may not eat Truma and Meiser B'Tumah. But Chulin ben Isser Klal. But Chulin, there's no Isser at all. The bread that I buy in the supermarket, the Angel's Bakery, or the other bakeries, it's Chulin. There's no Isser in making them Tameh. It is absolutely permitted to eat chulin that's tamei, to drink beverages that are tamei. Okay, my nemar rishon b'chulin tam rishoni pasul. So why do we see in the halacha that there's a concept of chulin being tamei, and it can be tamei if it's tamei, if it contacts truma food, it becomes pasul. Moshe asa b'chila doesn't mean that you can't eat the chulin that's tamei. Doesn't mean no truma kodesh, but for kodshim, where tuma is relevant, I need to be aware of what is touching kodshim, and I need to know that if I'm tamei and I ate this laffa sandwich, okay, I'm a tamei person. I'm in the middle of eating this sandwich. And then a Kohen would walk by, and he would walk by with his truma laffa, and it touches my shawarma sandwich. Now he can't eat the laffa. The laffa is puzzle. And there's a lot of diligence and care that went into maintaining the laws of Tuma and Tara. That's why, okay. It's mutter to eat Tuma, chulin that's tamei, and there's nothing wrong with making it tamei. I don't need to be careful. I'm not a Kohen, not even a Levi, I'm a Yisrael. I go to the supermarket, and I just came back from a Levaya, Lo Aleinu, so I'm an Avatuma. I can go buy groceries. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with causing Tuma. The chulin. Now, comes to Yantiv, it's different. But since comes Yantiv, I have to be Ola Regel, then I have to be Tahor, because I'm going to eat Kodshim. Hopefully, B'ezrat Hashem, Hashem will be here today, and we can all become, we'll all bring our Korban Pesach. Remember, Yameinu Amen. So, for that, you have to know about Tum and Tara. For Yantiv. Okay. Now, yes, it is certainly permitted to eat food that's tamei, drink beverages that are tamei. When you learn, you see in the Gemara, there was a community of people called Prushim. Prush means separate. Okay? And this may sound elitist to the point of being offensive, but this is an ideal. Okay? There were people in the times of the Gemara who ate chulin b'tara. They were careful about the laws of Tara. They would only eat food that's tahor. Nisanim in the tumos, kulan, kol yameim. Their whole lives, they avoided tuma to the extent that's possible. And they're called the Prushim, Pharisees. Okay? And in the New Testament, there's much as abuse is hurled at the Pharisees. Okay? They're the Pharisees. I don't know if they're the ones in the Testament, and they're whitened sepulchres, but they're the Pharisees, Prushim, and they were an elite. They were a separate group that viewed themselves as parish, as separate. Now these days we think a lot of equality and egalitarianism and all for one and one for all, which is valuable in a society, but some people want to be more. They're seeking holiness. There's a holiness in this. To us, it seems so foreign, but it's true. The truth in the Torah. There's a Kedushia Seira. This brings extra holiness. There are Chasidus. This is the way of piety. Nivda Adam of Parish Bishar Ha'am. That most people, and it's a fact of life, most people are not interested in spirituality. Most people simply want to be left alone and watch television and drink beer and eat potato chips. And, I mean, that's why McDonald's is such a successful chain. I mean, most people are just interested in that, fast food, watch TV. Netflix is very successful company. And I think there are more people interested in Netflix than there are people who are learning Daf Yomi. It's a fact. And it may sound elitist or insulting to the masses, but it's true. And there are people who don't want to be part of this. And it's like, I know that I was like, okay, I went to dental school and there were class parties. And when that went on in class parties, I couldn't be a part of. So I'm not saying I was parush, but you realize there's some things that are not meant for, God doesn't want humanity to be doing this in general. He doesn't want the Jewish people to be doing this in particular. And you don't eat with them. You don't drink with them. This idea of Tara isn't just the end in itself. The Tara of the Prushim was meant to lead to not just to preserve food. It's meant to preserve people from bad deeds. And yes, if you're abstaining from the food that's tameh, that means you're abstaining, it limits your social circle. That's a fact. I mean, it's enough that if you're an Orthodox Jew and you work with non-Jews, that you can't go out to parties with them. But this is even another layer or another level of social distancing, which we saw with the coronavirus. This abstinence leads to holiness of the soul because it will save you from Deus Ros. It'll save you from improper, wrong thoughts. And it's true, most parties are immoral. They even brag about it. So that's why there's a whole concept of purity. It's not just, yes, there's a din that you can't eat, but it means that this is the message of it. And the holier a person is, the closer a person is to God. And that's it. And that's Netilat Yadayim as part of the halacha's concept of social distancing. So, any questions? No. If there are no questions, then I wish you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach or Sameach v'Kasher, and wish me Zocha to eat the Korban Pesach this year. Bye bye.
Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.